Hello, thank you for coming. It's my honor to introduce a virtuoso writer this afternoon for a conversation with another gifted novelist, the director of UGA's creative writing program, Aruni Kashyap. Our guest today, Neel Mukherjee, is the author of 4 acclaimed novels. Each is likely to be commended for the author's deftly handed prose as for the fraught social and political realities faced by the characters he creates. Indeed, his first novel, A Life Apart, explores twin storylines. One which focuses upon a young man who has left Calcutta to flee his traumatic past, only to find new, harsh realities as he tries to remake himself, first as a university student in England, and then as an undocumented immigrant attempting to eke out an existence any way that he can. And the other storyline, written by the protagonist of the former, concerning a British woman educating the wife of a Zamindar in the ways of the English during the flashpoints of political unrest and violence in the late 19th and early 20th century Bengal. Here, Mukherjee's complex socially and politically situated characters are rendered in prose that some have described as incisive and poetic, as dazzling. His most recent novel, Choice, certainly continues this footing, and in an interview published in The New Statesman, the author explains, "I wanted Choice to show how all our behavior, our choices, our notions of agency, or constraints are always already political." A Life Apart, published in 2010, won the Writers Guild of Great Britain Award for Best Fiction. 2014's The Lives of Others was a finalist for the Booker Prize and won the Royal Society of Literature's Encore Award. 2018's A State of Freedom was a New York Times 100 Notable Books of the Year and chosen as a Book of the Year by NPR, NYPL, and Kirkus. And his most recent novel, Choice, was a finalist for the Goldsmith Prize and was a Wall Street Journal Top 10 Books of the Year. He's written a book in the Cahiers Series called Avian in 2020. And he teaches creative writing and English literature at Harvard University. Please join me in a round of applause in welcoming Neel Mukherjee, who will be discussing his work and giving a brief reading.
I'm terrified of this mic right now. Will you hold that one?
No.
Yeah, one is causing enough noise for me.
John, thank you for that very generous introduction.
Thank you, John. That was lovely. Well, ever since Neel has arrived in Athens, we have been chatting nonstop. So I don't even know what I'm going to ask him because I have already asked him what I needed to ask him because we haven't met in a while. But I said, you have to sit in my office for half an hour and I'm going to frame some interesting, intellectual sounding questions and then Neel will provide answers to those.
And while I'm sitting in the ante-room to his office, I discovered the poetry of Andrew Zawacki, and I also discovered that we were ships that just passed each other in the night many, many, many decades ago. I think of myself as an old man. Andrew isn't, Andrew's young. But I look forward to catching up with him later on. Also, I have to say this before we begin. This is my first time in the American South, and I was on a shuttle from the airport to Athens, and the shuttle had 13 people, mostly all strangers, who had just, a couple of them knew each other, we were students here, who were returning from Texas, and they were undergraduates, who were returning from a conference in San Antonio, in Texas. And astonishingly for me, for someone who lives in London, the whole 2-hour journey, every person was talking to each other. Strangers just got together and talked about their work. And the first person I talked to when I landed in Georgia was a British person, an art historian, who actually specializes in something that long time ago, once upon a time, I wanted to do my PhD in the hinge between the late medieval and the Renaissance, Simone Martini and Duccio. And I had no idea that I was going to be having this conversation with an English gentleman in Georgia. And it also turns out we are near neighbors in London. So I defy statistics, I feel. I don't want any statistician to say, I can't even say that word.
His flight was delayed because of the government shutdown and everything. And he landed at 1 a.m. and I thought he'd be like really upset. He was delightfully talking to this the young, this elderly gentleman.
And these two undergraduates in Georgia.
One of them had an English class.
They were yes, she said her life had been changed by taking a first-year class by someone, a medieval Cynthia Camp. And she and it was astonishing the way she was speaking about the university, about the courses she had taken, about the trial garden, about the botanical garden, about the campus halls. I thought, this is off. Thank God it's
No, please go ahead. I don't know what's going on. It's on again.
And,
yes.
And it was just such a joy to be talking to them. And it turned out that she's also a Latinist, and I trained as a Latinist. So we talked about Virgil for a while. It was very special.
Well, I'm so proud and very happy that this has been a lovely visit so far, and I hope it continues. I'm on that note, Neel. I was thinking, Neel doesn't want to do a reading; he wants to do this conversation. So I'll try to ask.
I hate reading from my work.
Yeah, I'll try to ask him very difficult questions. But Neel, you are not the usual route. You have not taken the usual route of a creative writer, going to an MFA program or MA in creative writing, all of that. You have a literature PhD. Can you talk about? I know you have mentioned this multiple times, but I think there's a bigger story behind it. How you came to write fiction after a literature PhD, after studying at Oxford for your undergraduate studies in English literature, and then at Cambridge you did your PhD in literature.
The real Cambridge.
Sorry, the real Cambridge, yeah.
not the false Cambridge where I find myself now. I came to writing by accident. There are writers who will tell you that from the age of 4, their mothers would tell them, "Oh, I knew you were going to be a writer. You were sitting in a corner and talking to your dolls and telling them stories." I did not. I ended up in writing because I failed in everything that I tried to do. So yes, it's true. I wanted to be a filmmaker, and when I was 18 years old, I applied to the US to do filmmaking and molecular biology, as one does. And in several colleges, I got admitted, but I was waitlisted for financial aid, without which I couldn't have come, and it didn't come down to my name. So I thought, right, I'm going to go to the film school in India, which is a very, very good film school, but I have to have a degree before I do that. So I thought, I'm going to do English literature. I like reading books. So I went to the very lazily, a personality trait that still characterizes me and will haunt me till my end of days. So very lazily, I went to the university, which was about a 12-minute walk from where I lived, and I read English literature there. And actually, reading literature is a very English way to put it, right? Americans don't say it. Anyway, I read for a degree in English literature, and my professors all caught hold of me and said, "Oh, you must apply to Oxbridge." They had done their higher degrees all in Oxbridge. So applied, and I got into Oxford and Cambridge, and I was lucky. I got a scholarship, and I went to Oxford, and there, and I knew at that time, I had already swerved away from filmmaking, and I knew at that time that I wanted to be a Renaissance academic, because my most inspiring professor, who is now my friend, she was a Renaissance academic. And then in Oxford, I was taught by a medievalist who means the world to me, and she taught me everything I know. Her name is Helen Cooper. So filmmaking, I had failed. I hadn't even tried. I failed. And then I went to Cambridge to do a PhD, and I worked on 16th century cultural history, and I was working on the Elizabethan conquest of Ireland, and working on Spencer and Raleigh. And then very early on in my PhD project, I lost all faith in it, and I also lost faith in the humanities. Anyway, don't worry about that, but I've come back because I've come back with redoubled zeal for the humanities. I can actually justify it to my social scientist friends, the economists, and say that you, economists, are responsible for the shrinking of the human soul, for all the trouble in the world that we find ourselves in. You have created the problems. We speak to the human soul and the spirit. You don't. You stick to your cost benefits analysis. I can now argue my way out of that. Anyway, but at that time I was little and I didn't know any better. But I finished my PhD, and then quickly after finishing my PhD, I left Cambridge, which is a place of great mental health hazard, and I came to London, and I worked in charity, and then I wrote my first novel, and then things get a little complicated.
Tell us more.
Sorry.
Spill. How did things get a little complicated?
That whole soul-destroying thing of sending your work out to agents, and many agents turned me down, and then one agent, a very big agent, took me on just by accident, I feel actually, and then he could not sell my first book, which is A Life Apart, and it sort of went under a bed for several years, during which I worked as a fiction reviewer for the Times. And then a brave Indian publisher decided to publish this book in 2008. But she picked it up in 2006. I finished it in 2001. And then the book, sort of 2 years after that, it came out in England. And then things started changing.
And this was A Life Apart, the one book here. The Life Apart, I think one of the reasons people in the West probably didn't understand is also because it was very much in interaction with a very famous Bengali novel and Bengali writer. And I've seen over the years that there is a lot of discussion about the queer identity in Life Apart, about immigration, immigrant life. But there is a novel inside a novel, story inside a story in Life Apart, which is the story of Mrs. Gilby. Mrs. Gilby is like not even a cameo in the Satyajit Ray's movie The Home and the World, which is an adaptation of the Bengali Nobel Prize-winning writer Rabindranath Tagore's the Ghare Baire. And you kind of got fascinated by Mrs. Gilby, who very fleetingly appears, and that's the way Hrithik gets fascinated. And then this story is inside A Life Apart, and Hrithik is writing this story.
Yes.
What got you sort of interested in Mrs. Gilby and write this novel in this way?
I don't remember, but I can give a retrospective answer, which will almost certainly be fictional. Is that the short answer is Virginia Woolf, and I'm going to answer that in a little bit. When I was an undergraduate doing my English degree in Calcutta, I read a book called Possession by the English writer A.S. Byatt, who later went on to become a very, very, very dear friend of mine. And I lost her a couple of years ago. And there's a big ASB-shaped hole in my life. Anyway, so I loved A.S. Byatt because at that time I had been bitten by the bug of Englititis. And it is such an Englititis infected novel, but I loved what she does with the dual narrative, those pastiche of Browning and Rossetti, and Christina Rossetti, and Henry Randolph Ashe and Christabel Lamotte, their names were in the book. And when I was sitting down to write A Life Apart, I had only Hrithik's story in my head. And then I was reading Virginia Woolf's diaries and letters, and just by chance, like she was writing to her sister, feeling anxious about the thinness of To the Lighthouse. I keep worrying that this is going to be a thin book, and by thin, I mean she didn't mean extent of pages. I mean she meant that the experience of the book would be thin, and she kept wanting to thicken the plot. She didn't say plot. She wanted to thicken the novel. I thought, well, Virginia Woolf thickening like, and I thought the book I had in my hands was a very thin book, with Hrithik's narrative. So I married A.S. Byatt to Virginia Woolf. I think and Tony would love hearing this actually, that, and I came across this kind of, like, I sort of thought I should write a dual narrative too, and then I got the two parts, the historical narrative and the modern contemporary narrative, to be in conversation with each other. Do you mind that I'm facing away from you while I'm answering your question?
It's fine. You don't have to stare at me all the time. Yeah. No, I think Ghare Baire is a very central novel, and in Indian imagination, in Indian letters. And at the same time, there are so many similarities. Mrs. Gilby is an immigrant, and he's an immigrant, but they have different levels of privilege and different levels of power. And Ghare Baire was very much also invested in through Bimola's character about independence. Is India really ready for independence was a question that Tagore repeatedly asked through Ghare Baire and many of his lectures. And Mrs. Gilby, I think, also invested in liberating Indian women, but in a very sort of ironical situation, isn't it? Is that what? Are you thinking about these things when you're writing it?
No, I mean, often all the correspondences are not conscious.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel, I mean, I don't want to mystify writing at all, because it is not. It is a material act. And I firmly believe in that. But often the text takes on certain kinds of, like an organic life of its own intentions,
Mm-hmm.
and does its own things. So some of the correspondences were worked in. But I mean, I think I worked on the big picture that colonialism too, if you think about it, was a form of economic migration.
Yeah.
And given the conversation that is happening with economic migrants all over the world now, and you know, that old post-colonial chestnut, which when they say, why are you here? Go back to your country, and your answer is, I'm here because you were there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I wanted to put those two things across historical time in conversation with each other. And then the other correspondence is kind of worked out. They're both outside. Ritwik is an outsider in England, and Miss Gilby is very much an outsider in Indian society, with which she tries to assimilate. I see of Miss Gilby as a good character, you know.
Yeah.
If you're
She has her biases, yeah, but she's a good person.
Fine, we all have our biases.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But it's also raised a very important question for me. I know you wrote this book in 2008, you know, just so many years ago. When you look at it, and do you see that that book, how the book is so interestingly in conversation with the Indian vernacular literature? Because I also feel that there are many malaise or many problems with Indian English writing. But one of the things that I've always felt is that Indian English writing in many ways should engage more with the vernacular tradition, because it emerges from that context and it marries some of the British tradition. But because it doesn't engage much with the vernacular tradition, it is often criticized as written by elites and so on and so forth. But I see that
they would not be able to say that about Life Apart, I hope.
They won't be able. That's what I'm saying.
Nor Lives of Others, which is my Bengali novel.
Yeah, they won't be able to. And I'm saying that, when I was reading I'm not flattering, you are a friend. So, but when I was an undergraduate in 2008, I was reading all these books that you wrote. We were supposed to hate the Indian English writer who does publish, because that was the trend, right?
Yeah.
And they must have done something wrong. They must have pandered to the West. They must have self-orientalized themselves. But it was not like that. The reading experience of reading A Life Apart was not like that. I felt it was very much steeped in the vernacular tradition. And now all of these conversations about interacting with the vernacular tradition, interacting with the regional tradition, borrowing from it, paying homage to it has become very central to the debates on of Indian English writing or South Asian Anglophone writing. So I see that the book was doing some of these things. I don't know if you're doing it consciously, but definitely it was doing those things at that point of time when it was published.
Well, thank you for thinking that. I was not very conscious of it, but I was trying to. It was a conversation with Tagore's novel, and it was a political conversation with Tagore's novel. And the thing is that not a single Western reviewer could pick up on it, and nor many Indians.
Yeah.
And I was very taken aback by that. I remember many years after it came out in England, this novel was published as my second novel in America. They published Lives of Others first, and then they bought Life Apart. And the critic who wrote about it in the New Yorker, I'm very grateful for her long essay in the New Yorker about it. She completely ignored the historical narrative, completely, because it was of no interest to her. So, And I was very taken aback by that. The book is a conversation. Like all books are conversations with other books.
You mean lives of others, right?
No,
yeah.
A Life Apart.
A Life Apart.
Yeah, Life
Okay.
Apart. She reviewed A Life Apart, and she completely ignored the historical side of things. But I have to be true to my material. I don't want to be writing for New Yorker critics.
Yeah.
So there are plenty enough writers who do that. So, for example, Lives of Others, I had to be true to the qualia, if you will, or the granularities of the Maoist revolution in Bengal at the time, and to the granularity of what a middle-class Bengali life would be at the time. I had no desire to write it, how should I put it, simplified to Western audiences.
Yeah, I mean, it's your magnum opus.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, it's your magnum opus. It's a big novel. It's a sprawling, big historical novel. And we have talked about this, and you have mentioned also that it is your kind of inspiration to the 19th century novel as well, right?
It's my homage to the 19th century novel, and it's my Russian novel in English, but it's my Bengali novel, but it's my Russian novel.
So
in
it's a
English.
Bengali novel in English, which is homage to the Russian novel and the 19th century British novel. But I think it's not incidental, even though he's saying this in jest. I think there are so many Bengali writers who actually contribute to this tradition, like Ashapurna Devi's trilogy, Samaras Majumdar's novels. A lot of them are not translated, so many people wouldn't know. But I think that again, this book continues a conversation with the vernacular tradition very, very robustly.
Absolutely, and then I think I did that, and then I stopped.
Why?
I don't want to be that writer who people point to in the street and say, look, that guy wrote his first book or one book 7 times over. There are so many writers who did that. They find a kind of success with their first book and then they're repeating. It's like Jaws or like Jaws 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
It's a franchise,
Yeah, I don't.
You don't want to write a
I'm
franchise.
not interested in it at all. I think I had to. The way I think I'm going with the novel form is, I had to go through the house of the great realist novel in order to come out the other end to do what I want to do now. And Lives of Others helped me to do it, but I don't think I'm going to write a book like that again.
I want to come to
I
what
hope
you.
I'm not going to write a book like that again.
It's a lot of hard work as well. Yeah, it's crazy.
My editors keep saying, "Oh my God, why don't you write a book that is just a story?" That is not a story. I think of the novel form as a very political form. All genres perform social work. All genres perform the work of ideology. Good Marxist training that I did not have in Cambridge, UK, but So I feel the novel has always been aware of its ideological status, and I wanted to make an intervention in that, but this is a different conversation altogether.
I would like to ask you about that, but just for those who don't know, this one, Lives of Others, is a big sprawling historical novel. It's a 3-generation story set in Calcutta, mostly in the late 60s, if I'm not wrong, but there are brief excursions to earlier history as well. It's a family saga. There are really such fascinating characters. I actually, for some reason, remember Chaya very well, even though there are so many men in the story, wanting different kinds of things, then the peasant revolution is happening. It's a really riveting family saga. But you were talking about how the novel performs this ideological, work, and echoing on the title of a book of your current colleague. I was wondering, what is it about the big sprawling family saga that writers go back repeatedly to narrate the nation, so to speak?
Title of mine?
Narrating the nation.
Yeah, Homie. Okay. Is that a book?
It's an edited collection, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think, if I remember well.
That came out after Location of Culture?
Yes, I guess. Yeah. I don't remember the chronology.
You're exposing my literacy in public.
Mine too.
I shall have you for this.
But you don't have to. But I'm saying,
No.
They're using the canvas of the family to talk about the nations.
The family is a political unit.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So what was I trying to do in the book? Okay, so I was the novel is the handmaid of capitalism. I mean, we know that actually. So you think of Pride and Prejudice as a book of love, as a book about love, but really step back a little bit and think of how every character is costed down to his last penny or her last penny, money and marriage, and then the French Revolution in 1789, and she's writing the novel. The novel is published 24 years, 1813, 24 years after the French Revolution. Britain is in a total turmoil about the fear, the panic of one of the greatest revolutions that ever happened in the world. It's just impossible to overstate the importance of that. It made America possible. It made everything possible in history, in Western history, I feel. And Britain is in a panic, and there's those pamphlet wars going on. Burke on the conservative side, Paine and Wollstonecraft on the progressive side, and meanwhile structures of family are changing from the consanguineal to the conjugal, and primogeniture has made impossible for women to inherit property. So she is thinking about all these things. Why love? Why marriage to a person who is worth £10,000 a year, as Mr. Darcy is? You cannot see it as a novel of love. It is a novel. She's a conservative novelist, and ultimately she comes down on the side of she's not thinking about inequality, the poor, anything at all. She's actually securing the novel form for the rising middle classes, right? So there is a thinking going on in politics, and the novel is performing ideological work. I was thinking the inspiration for Lives of Others is an early 20th century novel, German novel called Buddenbrooks by Thomas Mann. And Mann was, of course, meditating about mercantile capitalism in Germany. And I was thinking, okay, can we update the novel's very complex conversation with capitalism for a later time, in a later specificity of history, in a different country, that is. And that's how Lives of Others was born. I'm afraid I'm one of those novels whose novelists come out of reading other books and theory and stuff. So
I'm sure you're not the only one.
No, I'm not the only one. I mean, I'm sure. But most writers seem to be somehow embarrassed about admitting it.
Oh, come on.
And I don't like that at all. But here I am.
I love talking about influences. And I know that Aesbat has been a lingering influence, because you come back to A State of Freedom, you go back to what you really want to do by breaking out from that linear, big, sprawling 19th century novel that is market-friendly, consumer-friendly, and editor-friendly and agent-friendly. So you go into The State of Freedom, which is a 5 kind of connected narratives, what sometimes people call a noveline, a set of novellas that are intellect, or a novel in novellas, novel in stories. Is that why you went into that? Is it to sort of like show your departure from a lot of the dominant conversation of what one should publish as, and that's why you use that framework again to write A State of Freedom? Yeah.
That's a very good question. So if you read the work of any poet, what they're sold, they carry the whole history of poetry in every line they write. They're thinking about form. And to know about form, they have to know about, every line written by a particular poet in the sonnet form has the whole history of Dante to Terence Hayes now on their shoulder. So I don't know why novelists think they can escape this wonderful burden, which is also a gift. State of Freedom was written as in the way that Lives of Others was a conversation with Mann. A State of Freedom was a conversation with a novelist I hold very close to my heart. He's in very bad odor at the moment. His name is V.S. Naipaul, and I'm not going to defend his a lot of things that he's said and done and written. But, there is no denying that he was an absolutely revolutionary spirit in the novel form. And this is a conversation in A Free State by him, 1967? 69, 70, 71, I don't remember. It won the Booker Prize that year. The Booker Prize used to be given to challenging and path-breaking novels until it became the Oscars of literature. That is like a formally such an incredibly inventive book. It's bookended by excerpts from Naipaul's own travel diary. The first one set in India, and the last one, Bombay, and the last one set in Egypt. And in the middle, there are 3 stories, and the longest of them is called, which is set in Africa, it's called In a Free State. And I tried to talk back to that novel, and I was thinking, can one write a novel where, this is about, every poet's inquiry of the form that they're writing. I thought, can the novel go about abolishing all the things that are so thought of as the novel form's own things, like plot, character, continuity of narrative, development of interiority, emotion, and break all those things and still answer to the question, still return a complex answer to the question, is this a novel? So I kind of, that was my conversation. But again, with the possible exception of Michael Gora in the New York Times, not a single critic, despite the name that had given the book, thought it was a conversation in a free state, and which is very odd. I feel, I don't know, people are either not reading Naipaul anymore, or they really haven't read anything, and let me not get into that o tempora o mores mode now. So
you don't want to channel Ayush, who is the character in Choice.
Yeah. No, I don't want to channel.
I have quite a lot of questions. Choice is about, and then open it up. Choice is Neel's latest novel, published in 2024 June. It's about this character called Ayush, who works as a publisher in London, but at the same time he's very disgruntled with the extremely neoliberal, market-driven conversation about literature, and how those forces end up sort of deciding who gets published, whose books get supported, what kind of launches they're going to have, and he wants to publish work that is daring and conversation starting, and he's not able to do that when we begin the novel, and that makes him take some personal and professional chances or choices that are quite far-reaching. So, but I have questions, but I think after this very stimulating set of answers, I think the audience is really eager to ask you questions. And I know somebody probably has a mic going on.
Sure.
Please raise your hand, and then I'll come to you. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
1 second, I wrote it down a couple minutes ago.
Oh, great.
So, your magnus opus, right, A Life Apart, you wrote it in 2001,
Yeah.
so it's been a little over 2 decades.
Yeah, I actually look at that book and I think, what does it have in it? I don't remember that book very well actually. So, and I don't read my books. So, I mean, why would I? Life is too short.
So, coming from that perspective, and you mentioned, art as a political piece, I was wondering, do you still feel like this book that you wrote 20 years ago does it still reflect who you are today? A book that came out so long ago, I mean, you've changed so many different times, you've gone through different things.
That's a very, very smart question, actually. I don't know how to answer that. Did I write it? Yeah, in a certain kind of objective, scientific reality way. I did write that book, but I'm a different person now, and I don't know. I mean, it was a different person who wrote the book, I think. Do I stand by? I stand by it. Of course, I wrote the book. I own it, and it enabled me to go on this. I think all art is political. Don't believe anyone who says otherwise. So they are actually bamboozling you. Mm-hmm. Always ask the question: in whose interest is it to see art as apolitical? Apolitical is a very political position. You must understand that, right? The New Yorker is not an ideology-free space, So it might pretend to be an objective assessment and criticism that like it's not. It is as partisan as the National Review or something. It's helped me carry on my thinking about genres doing ideological work. So then I started thinking about early capitalism, and then now in Choice I was thinking about how I take on economists in the Choice. I feel that choice is a much fetishized notion in neoclassical economics. So the rational actor making choices, and I mean, to be fair to them, they think choices are of course defined by constraints. And I want to ask the question, how has late capitalism, or now as Anna Kontulu calls it, too late capitalism, I love that. How has it rewired our interiorities and minds and selves? We are very different people from early industrial revolution people. We are a different species, I feel, in some ways. And how capitalism has gone into every corner of our lives and every single cell and stuff. As I said, the human has been rewired. And I was trying to look at all those things and thinking, do we really live in the best of all possible worlds? And I was trying to ask certain questions about constraints and what we, is there any escape from the world that we have made for ourselves? Is there an outside point from where we can stand? And like Archimedes said, give me a space to stand in the big lever, I'll move the earth. Is there an out there where, I think not. I don't have a rosy view of history. I'm not an optimist, and I'm proud of not being an optimist. So I stand by that in the way that it enabled me to take all the next steps.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
So earlier you mentioned the wonderful burden in which every line that you write contains the whole history of the form, such as poets.
No, poets do that. Novelists are careless people. In poetry, every single word and space is weighed and weighted. Novelists can't do that. That's what, hang on, it's Faulkner who said this. Everyone tries to be a poet, and then they realize how difficult it is, and they can't do it. Then they try the short story form, and they realize how difficult that game is too. Then they become a novelist. Because being a novelist is a cheats game, I think. You can always hide in a novel. But poetry, God, no.
Well, okay, a selfish follow-up.
Yeah.
How can you hide in a novel? And are there ways that you try to not hide in a life?
No, by hide, I mean that it's not a blade of light form if you read a tight form a tercet or a sestina or a sonnet or something or a villanelle. It's just and how the lines have to be of a particular feet. Andrew, foot or feet?
Depends how many are in there.
Oh, okay.
Probably
Feet, of course, you can't have one foot, yeah. And they have to be of a certain measure, and you have to, it's such a constraint, but all constraints are enabling, right? So a genre is an invitation to be constrained so that you can enable yourself in any other way. A novel too is like that, but you have more room to sort of, move around. When Terence Hayes says, I lock you in an American sonnet, it is, and he calls it a part prison house, part meat grinder, part panic closet. You can understand how poetic forms imprison, but that is its freedom. The novel does not imprison you in that way. It can be messy, you can fudge the ending, and if you can't fudge the ending, you can always kill the characters. There's a lot of leeway, let's put it that way. But not, I meant hide in a more playful sense.
John, you have a question there?
Yeah, so I very recently started reading Choice, and I love the portion where Ayush kind of begins skewering Luke about his view of economics or capitalism as scientific.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, especially with your view of art and the novel being like inherently political, and the novel, you know, being the product historically of bourgeois culture, can the novel like do ideological work in your opinion to undo like or change people's minds in a world of like capitalism?
Yeah, try. No. I mean, the novel has
It has been green. Oh, yeah, good.
the novel has always been a very self-aware form from its very beginning. Yes, I feel there are lots of writers who write against the grain, and for it not to be a kind of ideological tool in that way, they too write from their own ideology. There's no free space outside ideology is what I meant. But there's a wonderful American writer called Atticus Leish. He wrote an amazing first novel called Preparation for the Next Life. There are plenty of writers who are critical of the novel's entwinement with bourgeois ideology. But it's a very self-questioning form. And I feel so much of the novel form, we understand it now, the kind of novels that are reviewed in, say, New York Times or New Republic or wherever, the novels that are pushed on us and stuff, they perform an ideological function too, except that perhaps they don't know that they're doing that. But there are plenty of novelists writing who make that ideology very transparent in their works. Yes. Of course,
Jim, Jim and
Thank you, Neel. I haven't read Avian yet, but I wanted to hear at least how and why you chose birds as such an influential counterpart to your human characters.
Okay. I was speaking to some of the most incredible graduate students I've ever met in early on today, and they were all thinking about what we used to, like an oldie like me used to call the non-human, but now I've been educated correctly, and I should call them the more than human world, because that's a wonderful term, I think, more than human. We are not at the center of things. The non-human say the other reference point always, but more than human frames it in a very different way, and I love that. I don't know even how to talk about this. My interest in Tolstoy, who gets into the heads of horses and dogs and gives them interiority. The growing awareness that which my student generation have pushed upon me, and I'm very, very, very grateful to them, that we share the planet with other creatures who perhaps, and not just creatures, I feel other living forms like mountains, streams, lakes, forests, trees. And we owe each of these things to our fellow creatures duty. From reading a book of philosophy by a neo-Kantian, Christine Korsgaard, I think her name is. It's called Fellow Creatures. Peter Singer. So all this at the back of my head, and I wanted to do something about that, to write about the more than human world. I'm very interested in birds and birdsong. I'm very interested in plants and trees and flowers and stuff. I was amazed to see camellia flowering here in October. This is unthinkable in the north or in England. Camellias flower in February and then they're gone. So I'm quite curious about what those camellias are. So I find myself noticing the more than human world, and increasingly I find myself very attracted to the idea of writing about them. And I've been interested in birdsong, and a dear friend of mine is a computational neuroscientist who worked out the neural pathways of how a baby male bird learns the song from his father, and he traced the whole auditory cortex complex by how the learned behavior then becomes action, like it is learned behavior. And I immersed myself in some computational neuroscience stuff, oh my God, this is just quite extraordinary. And that was that was the book that came out of it, which Dan Gunn at the Cahiers Series he asked me to invite me to write a book for that series. And I felt very honored. So that's why Birdsong. I put Birdsong in choice as well. I think Birdsong is going to come in a lot of my books. Jim, thank you.
Ezra?
Thanks, Neil. I'm interested in the afterlife of writing, or afterlife of a book, in the sense that I know what you're going to say, that you're not thinking about the readership, but perhaps...
Well, no, I am thinking about it, but sorry, please ask your question.
Well, it always makes me think about one thing that has happened with the works of Orhan Pamuk, for example, the Turkish Nobel laureate. He's always a bestseller in Turkey, but nobody reads his books. That even though he's always at the top of the charts, everybody says in Turkey, well, he's too postmodern for my taste. So I'm kind of wondering, you talk about, of course, writing is a solitary act, but it has to be a crowd pleaser. And also there's like the changing dynamics of readership, especially when we're thinking about the classroom even now, that our students have a different way of reading things. And they don't always read things in its entirety. So how do you position yourself as a novelist in terms of appealing or connecting with readers?
This is a very complex question, and it's going to be a long answer, and most of it I'm going to be thinking on the hoof, actually. So, do you like Pamuk's work?
I do, actually.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no.
Are you friends with him?
Yes.
You are? Oh, I'm sorry. I meant I'm sorry that I was going to say something very cutting about his works, but I'm now not going to. But imagine it said.
You won't be the first person.
I find him unreadable. Absolutely unreadable. So, but you know, I'm a minority. I mean, there are people who you cannot read, but you know, and I find him. Never mind. Let's stop there. I think it's best not to think about readership and market, because you always try to second guess or third guess what the public wants. It also depends what kind of a writer you want to be, you know. Do you want to be a best-selling writer? Do you want to, of course, everyone wants to be a best-selling writer, but you know, given what the bestseller landscape is now, do you think your talents lie that way? Do you think your inclinations lie that way? I wouldn't be able to write the Harry Potter books because my imagination doesn't work that way. I wouldn't be able to write like Colleen Hoover because my imagination does not work that way. So it partly is like, you know, we write what we can. And so that's a constraint. But once you started thinking about, you know, pursuit of something, it is always, I feel, like a very thorny and spiked and always already a queered pitch, because the game changes all the time, and I feel it's best to just decide what you want to do, what interests you, and you know, most writers will tell you they write for themselves. We actually do. You know, I don't think I have any reader in my mind. It's just a great stroke of luck that somebody has published me and my books are read by the 10 or 15 people that they are. And when the market comes in, and of course, you know, the stories of writers have been dropped by their publishers because their books are not selling. That story is like chilling, and it happens all the time. We just have to walk that tightrope, I feel, you know. Do Pamuk's books sell in translation in the Anglophone world?
Yes. Yeah, very well.
Yeah, are you a fan?
Kind of, yeah. I'd love to know the incisive critique.
Oh, there's no incisive critique, please. No. I just cannot. I find his books dull, and I cannot read them because its kind of density is not the kind of density I enjoy. I love the work of Krasnohorkai. I think he's a dense writer, and I think, oh my God, this is where it's all at.
But I also read fiction to relax, right? I'm
Right.
not necessarily looking, I mean, I
Sure,
do
sure.
difficult stuff for a living.
Sure.
So I mean,
Sure,
I
sure.
go to different things for different reasons.
Yeah, and I don't like, I don't write books that one reads for relaxation. So that's my bad, as my students say. But there are plenty of writers who write for relaxation and stuff. I devour crime fiction all the time, and it satisfies a certain side of me. But I read Krasnohorkai to satisfy very different things for different. Yeah, absolutely what you said. So I very much agree with that. But I feel I write like the frozen axe to the sea, Kafka. So the axe to the frozen sea. I feel I want my books to be. I don't write for people to enjoy my books necessarily. So yeah.
Avinash, you have Avinash and Naveen. Last two questions. Okay.
I'm just trying to grasp on what you said a couple of minutes ago and trying to frame out. I think you shared some anguish about the fact that at least I haven't read enough, so I'm just trying to. You shared some anguish about the fact that some of these critics don't get how you're responding to NYPL. And on the other side also we talked a bit about the vernacular traditions. The question then is, actually the problem with Kharevaide was also the same, right? When Lukács read it, the Hungarian Marxist, he called it a Gandhian novel, and Gandhi comes 6 years after this novel. Right, so there was a problem there of reception, and that reception problem is primarily because there is no vernacular available in the market. Right?
Yeah.
So the Anglophone is reading Anglophone, but there is no background to it. Right? So they're not able to process where
Very
from
true.
is the tradition in reality. I'm curious to know what you think about that, because when you write in English, you're aware of the local, or what I call local, or what we call local from here, right? How do you manage that problem of intertextuality? Because you're speaking essentially to a black audience, and you're making the connections with them, right? To the novel.
This is an extraordinary question. Thank you very much. Lukács is a very big deal for me. I disagree with him a lot. I mean, the whole idea of the totalizing novel is something I push back against and stuff. But that that Lukács, Adorno, Benjamin, they have all been incredibly important for me to think about the world. How do I think that there is an act of like mediation always going on, and I don't actually. You just let it be, and those who get it, and those who don't. And there is no point. Yes, I am anguished by it, but I used to be the kind of person who used to stay up, not sleeping, worrying about these things. I don't anymore. Time teaches you a lot of lessons, and one of the lessons it teaches you is that you need to let go of certain things. So I just don't care. I mean, I feel I'll write the books that I want to write. If people get them, they do. They don't, then don't. I mean, I'm not in the business of being an entertainer to please everyone. I write for different reasons. So that's a very market-oriented answer to your question. I want to give a more theoretical answer, quoting Lukács and Marx and others, but that's for another time.
Yes. I think I heard you say at the beginning that you're writing true to yourself. And over the years, how has yourself transitioned, changed, and how have your books changed with it? Whether you're, and the second part is that you talk about novels being political. Has your politics changed with that? Democrat, socialist Democrat, liberal capitalism, conservative capitalism, there's a whole range that you've lived under now.
My politics has moved further and further to the left. They say that as you get older, you get more and more conservative. I think in my life, I found the movement, and in a lot of my younger friends and colleagues, and I find them moving in the other direction, which is incredibly refreshing for me to see. And how has my work changed? You know, I don't know how people read apolitically. A book like any American, like, is Philip Roth apolitical? Is Don DeLillo apolitical? Is Pynchon apolitical? These are some of the most political writers we have, you know? So it depends on what kind of lens you bring to see the world. And I feel I'm the kind of person who's stuck with that lens of politics. And to, as I said, you know, to ignore it and say everything is apolitical is a hard sphere of politics and stuff. I mean, I don't believe it's all market forces like the economists believe. I also don't believe it's all about, like the Marxists, I don't believe it's all about means of production, or, you know, whatever you'd like to call it. I believe in the human soul and the human spirit. That's a surplus that neither economics nor Marxist theory can account for. So I hope I've sort of, you know, managed to keep holding on to that idea of the human soul and human spirit. That's the way I've changed. I used to be a much more, how should I put it, much more materialist. But by materialist I mean, I don't fancy material things. I'm not materialistic. But by materialist I meant in the kind of historical materialist way. I used to be a more fundamentalist materialist. I'm no longer that, I feel. So I'm also not like Marilyn Robbins, who believes, like, who is a believer and she's religious and stuff. But I do believe that there is a surplus that no amount of these things can take account of. I've been roundly attacked by my friends for bringing back dualism and thinking like that. But you know, if you read poetry, you can't really figure out that there's an excess to poetry that does not answer to any theory. So,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.